This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 288 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with Rita Perwich, consulting rosarian and author of Natural Rose Gardening, about growing roses organically. The plant profile is on Larkspur, and we share what's going on in the garden as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on summer squash companions from Christy Page of Green Prints. At the end of this episode, I share my favorite rose. Stay tuned after the credits for that. This episode, we're joined by Rita Perwich. She is a rosarian and the author of the upcoming book, Natural Rose Gardening, the Organic Guide to Growing Amazing Blooms. Welcome, Rita.
Thank you, Kathy.
It's great to have you on, and I'm so excited to learn about your organic growing techniques for roses. But before we dive into all of that, Rita, were you born with a green thumb and chlorophyll in your veins?
Yeah, Kathy, for me, this is not strictly a yes or a no answer. So do you mind if I answer it with a story?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So as a child, our garden was my happy place. So if I wasn't reading a book, I was out in the garden exploring. I was digging or climbing trees or looking at and smelling the flowers. And I really, really loved all the insects. I grew up in Rhodesia, which is now called Zimbabwe, and we had some amazing insects. We had a gardener, so nobody thought to give me a plant to plant, which is a bit unfortunate. But at the same time, I was a lover of nature and I was an explorer, and I learned the art of being attentive and observant in the garden as a child. And I consider that to be one of the requisites of having a green thumb. You know, the other is giving a plant what it wants. But when you put those two together, I think that's what creates that green thumb. So anyway, to wind back to the question as to whether I was born with a green thumb, but I'm going to fast forward now a couple of decades. And this part of the story is a little sadder because we bought a house. My husband and I bought a house, and it had a nice garden, and it had 3 tree roses. And I had heard that roses needed to be pruned. So one day in the summertime, mind you, hadn't done any research. In the summertime, I decided this was when I was going to prune these roses, and I wanted to get them tidy. And so I kept cutting. I found the pruners in the garage, and I cut and I just couldn't get it tidy enough. And so I cut right under the bud union. I figured I'd give it a nice fresh start. And as soon as I did that, I recognized that perhaps I'd gone too far. And when my husband came home, I didn't do the other two roses. And my husband came home, and he doesn't know anything about roses, but he took one look at it and said, yeah, you went one cut too far. When we renovated our house, I realized I needed some gardening help, and I took an adult education, a gardening class with a master gardener, and it was an eye-opener. She basically said, give a plant what it wants. You know, she told us about the Sunset Garden book, and I was thrilled. It was just kind of just opened up a whole world, because that's what I think what the green thumb is. Give the plant what it wants, and then you're attentive to it. And I planted a garden, and it grew beautifully. And so the next year in Coronado, we have a flower show, an annual flower show. This year we celebrated the 104th year. It's under a tent. And, you know, I looked at my garden that day and I cut a rose and I took it in. I thought you could only take one rose, and I took it in and I entered it, and it won the best novice trophy. And not only that, but they asked me if I would co-chair the rose section the following year. So I was stunned. I thought, gosh, that must have been a wonderful rose. Of course, I think it was probably because it's hard to find volunteers. But anyway, I started reading everything there was to know about roses. And then I got more and more into gardening. And my adult gardening teacher, who was a master gardener, she sponsored me to become a master gardener. And I did that. And I started with the school gardens in Coronado. We did 2 gardens in the elementary school and 1 in the middle school. And I really wanted children to have the opportunity to plant and grow plants, because a lot of them hadn't. A lot of them had never done that. And a lot of them had with their parents, but a lot of them hadn't. And to this day, some of them will actually come up to me and say how much fun they had when they were doing it. So I did that, but roses were my passion. So I joined the American Rose Society and the San Diego Rose Society, and I became a consulting rosarian. And then I was asked to write for the Union Tribune, which is our newspaper here in San Diego. And I found that writing was fun, and actually it entailed more research into roses, and that was my, is and was becoming more and more of my passion. And so that's where I finally started thinking about writing a book.
And then now your first book is coming out, and it will be out October 2026, correct?
Yes.
And we'll have a link to that pre-order with the show notes. But first, let's talk a little bit about your garden, where you garden in those conditions, since you're San Diego, California based. A lot of our listeners are in the Mid-Atlantic. So very different, right? Almost Mediterranean climate that you have.
Yeah. So our zone, I live in Coronado, which is in San Diego, California. The zone, there's a couple zones in San Diego. I'm coastal and I'm B. So yes, we are very different to your area, but at the same time, a lot of the rose care is the same. I'm going to say the planting is obviously going to be different. The timing of your planting, your pruning is going to be somewhat different. The goals in pruning are going to be the same, but there are going to be some differences. My garden is a small garden. Coronado, like I said, it's coastal. All the gardens are small. I can't even tell you how big it is, but I grow about 100 roses, probably a few more, but some of them are miniatures. I don't count the miniatures. So about 100 roses, but I also grow a lot of other plants, because I really believe that you need to have a diversity of plants in your garden. So I've got fruit trees. I've got fig trees, 3 fig trees, beautiful mulberry tree, lemon, 2 apples. I use every square inch of the garden. And then I also have other ornamental plants, and I call them companion plants. That I really believe one of the successes in growing roses is not to just grow roses all together. The monoculture of roses, the beneficials are a big part of growing roses successfully. And so we want to entice them into our gardens with a diversity of plants. And we also want to keep away disease as much as we can. And if you just grow roses, like the traditional formal rose garden that a lot of people do, then, you're inviting more disease and problems with disease.
Yeah, I think that's true of any monoculture that you would grow, that, you're just inviting those disease issues. But having a diversity in the garden is always wonderful. And you mentioned observation being a number one way to have a green thumb. And I totally agree with that, Rita, that just observing what the plant wants and stepping back and maybe not doing too much at first, right? Like letting the plant do what it wants to at first and then assessing and then moving in is really the key to a green thumb.
I think what happens with, when we plant, a lot of people will plant and then go inside and then just forget about it. I think we need to be in our garden ideally every day, because what that helps us do is to we just recognize when something's right and when something's wrong, and you don't want to get your plants to the point where they're stressed. So it'll just take me a minute to walk through the garden, like just through the walkway when I'm going out in the morning just to open the gates. And I can tell just right away because I'm so familiar with them. And when I tell people that they need to be in the garden often, it's not a hardship. The time out in our garden is so good for us. And so as gardeners, we're so fortunate. We've got such a wonderful hobby or passion. It's good for us, our mind, body, and soul. And really that time when we go outside is just so calming. And then we have all the beautiful things like, you go outside and then you see the hummingbird or the butterfly. But also when you get coming back to the plants, you can immediately see, I'll walk out and in each season, there's always something. There's always some pest who's out there. And then you see the lacy leaves. I don't have a big problem with the rose slug because when I see them, the lacy leaf, I just pull it off. And then I'll walk by other gardens and the whole plant is just covered in lacy leaves. And so that gardener is going to feel the pressure of, so what do? Do I take out my roses? I can't grow roses, or are they going to start using pesticides? If you just do it on a daily basis, notice it right away and then do it on a daily basis, you're not going to feel that pressure. You're just going to enjoy your garden a lot more, and your plants are obviously going to be healthier.
So true, Rita. And I think the more time you spend with your plants, the more you get to know them, and then immediately, as you say, if there is an issue, to get it early and not have to resort to artificial chemical use.
Right.
And so your book is all about natural rose gardening and being an organic gardener. So let's define that term.
Okay. So, I grow my roses naturally and organically. So by naturally, I mean I don't use pesticides and fungicides. I just don't. And I don't believe we need to do it. But there's a couple things we do need to do, and that is we need to select the right roses. So there's a lot of great roses, but not all roses are going to grow as well in each region. So we need to select our roses with care for what's right in our region. And I do have some resources for that. Help Me Find is a good resource. You look to see, and sometimes they don't have the specific region, and then you got to do a little bit more research. Also, if you're reading about a rose and it doesn't say it's disease resistant, then don't get it, because our best and time efficient way to look after a rose and not have frustration is to buy a disease resistant rose. And a lot of the hybridizers in the last decade or two are already concentrating on producing disease resistant roses because so many of us don't want to spray. So that's what I mean by natural rose gardening, is to really grow roses so we're not needing to use pesticides and fungicides. We're not jeopardizing the balance of nature, because our best method of pest control and our greenest method of pest control is our beneficials. And I can't overstate how dependent how dependent we are on them, and how grateful we are for them. They cost us absolutely nothing. They eat the insects that harm our pests. They're either, predatory or parasitic. And sometimes when you read about, these beneficials, and I do discuss each one of them in my book, some of the parasitic ones, it's like reading a sci-fi, where they sci-fi novel, they lay their eggs on the pest, and then the larva goes into the pest, and eats the insides of it and drains it out. It's just, you read this and you just go, this is magnificent. Why would I jeopardize this most time-saving and effective tool that I have? But we do need to learn how to identify them. There's a lot of education that goes into natural rose gardening. One is, identify what the pests are. There aren't that many. There's a lot of insects in the garden. 90% of them are not going to be affecting our roses or our plants. So we leave them alone, learn which ones are, learn to identify them. I have nothing against squishing a pest. I do have a section in my book about Zen in the rose garden, but I think it's very Zen to go out and squish aphids. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm obviously not going to get all of the aphids, and the rest that I don't get are going to bring in those lady beetles. But I do need to learn how to identify the pests and also identify the beneficials, because you don't want to go and kill, or squish a lady beetle larva because they don't look like a lady beetle. I think we all know what a lady beetle looks like.
Yeah, and that's such a classic case, Rita, is the little instar stage of the lady beetle or ladybug can look a little scary. And if you don't know what it is and you smush it, that's a tragedy right there.
Right. And beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Once you do know what it looks like, you're so thrilled to have it. And really, we need to practice a lot of patience in our garden, because, when we're patient, the good guys will arrive. So we're not going to be pest free. We're not going to be pest free in a garden that doesn't use pesticides, but we're going to be so much healthier. And I think what we need to do is sort our priorities. Do we really need perfection? I think this is one of those situations in life where, we always want to do everything, to the best of our ability. But this is one of those situations where we can lower our standards. It does, I don't like going out there and seeing a bloom that I was just waiting to see. It was bud, and I was just waiting to see what the bloom was going to look like, and I couldn't wait. And I go out there and it's got a hole in it. It's, a caterpillar bore into it. That does bother me. It's not that it doesn't bother me, but it's okay. We've all got to eat. It ate it. It's going to be okay. We just have to lower our standards a little bit and reach a tolerable, put up with a certain level of damage, and just recognize that that's going to happen because it's worth it. And our plants will be healthy for it. We're not just, and when I'm, growing roses, they're my passion, but I'm not just growing roses. I want to also grow a healthy garden. And so I think we can lose sight of that as rose gardeners. We can be so passionate, especially if you exhibit roses. I'm not an avid exhibitor. I do exhibit roses at the Coronado Flower Show because I'm the chairman of the rose section, and also the San Diego Rose Society. But that's the extent of it for me. So I'm not an exhibitor, but my roses do end up on the award table, and I haven't used pesticides or fungicides. So, it does work. You select the right roses, you give them what they want, and then you're vigilant. And it really does work. You can have a beautiful rose garden.
And Rita, I couldn't agree more about not having to have that perfect garden, right? A weed here or there, so a little bit of insect damage here or there is just fine. That's life. You're never ever going to achieve 100% perfection, even if that is your goal. And that was going to be my next question, was about rose showing, but there are more and more competitions that have a separate category, organically grown or natural roses, I've noticed. And if you're a competitive rose grower, you could do both. You could experiment and do both if you wanted to, and see how well you do in each category, whether it's with chemically grown roses or not. But I think that is also a lot of the hesitation amongst beginner rose gardens, or people who used to grow roses and might have ripped theirs out because they wanted perfection, there was some issue, and then they gave up. What do you say to those people,
Yeah,
Rita?
those are the ones. Those are the ones that are the saddest, and I keep hearing it too. I used to grow roses, but I took them out because they were so difficult. Or I used to grow roses, but then I got so tired of spraying them, and so I took them out. Or then there's other people who don't even try because they've heard they've got to be sprayed. They don't have to be sprayed. And it's interesting that you're saying that there's some shows that have the separation of roses that are sprayed or roses that aren't. Honestly, I wouldn't be able to separate them out. They don't look any different. You're obviously, when you go out there that day to cut your roses to take to the show, you're going to cut the best looking rose. You're not going to take up a dinged up rose. I don't even know that shows do need to separate them out. So I find that interesting that they some do that. Yeah, my mission is to spread the love of roses, to let people, and I spread that love of roses by helping people grow them well, and also to understand and get the word out that roses don't have to be sprayed. And that's what this book is about, to really help people grow roses well, and to let them know that you don't have to use pesticides and fungicides. It's so presumptuous to believe that we can spray and not disturb nature's balance. We do need a diversity of plants. We need a biodiversity of insects in the garden. And then we need to trust in nature's interconnectedness and the natural balance. And that will, there is a fear that people have of imperfection, but we've just talked about it. We can smother that fear, and we can let ourselves take that deep breath and say, it's okay. It's okay if there's a few dings in my roses. But I think it's really important I talked about this before, select the right roses, but then also give the rose what it wants. And another way to say that is good rose culture, because you can't expect a rose, you can't bring a rose home and then plant it in the shade and then expect it to grow well. It's not going to grow well. It's a sun plant. And you can't expect it to grow well if you don't water it deeply and if you don't amend the soil. So we do need to give it good rose culture, and a plant that is healthy because you've looked after it and given it what it wants and then kept an eye on it is going to be a healthier plant, so that if it is, if it is attacked by a pest, it's going to be, or gets a disease, it can bounce back. Roses are hardy. Most roses are hardy. We still do need to make sure we select the right ones.
And I think roses are such a tough shrub, most of them,
Yes.
We were talking about cutting below the bud union or the graft. Aside from that, there's really not that big of a problem of cutting it back hard every year. Some people, if it's on its own root, will do it to the ground sometimes. And if it dies back in winter that much, it still comes back. I mean, we have those old-fashioned cemetery roses that have been not cared for over 100 years and still doing great on their own. So that just tells you that humans aren't needed for a lot of the rose survival, but of course, if you want a beautiful, healthy rose, then some gardener care is always welcome.
Yes. One of the things I actually address in the book is about the pesticide limitations and drawbacks. And I almost didn't have that in there because I thought, okay, well, this is a book about not using pesticides, so why am I actually talking about it? I wanted to include this chapter. One of the editors at Chelsea Green Publishing wasn't sure that it should be there, and I explained, people need to know, it's an education. People need to know the drawbacks because of using pesticides. It's all an education. Pests become resistant to pesticides. We have open gardens, and I think you probably have open gardens in your area as well. And sometimes you'll go to gardens where people use pesticides and they still have damage. The pesticides don't get rid of all the pests. So you're still going to have that. And pests, for instance, if you sprayed and you were spraying when at a different part of the life cycle of the pest, you're not going to actually, kill the pest. But not only that, but pests become resistant to pesticides. So then when you start spraying, then you're going to keep switching pesticides. And then you're going to have to start switching with pesticides with different modes of action. You're going to have to do a lot of research and figuring out, what the active ingredients are on each of the pesticides. Like I said, you go to an open garden sometimes, and it's not that there are no pests. In fact, the problem becomes actually that there's no beneficials. And now you've just opened, when you use pesticides, you open that Pandora's box. And so you've used your insecticides and you've killed all these insects. And so you've also killed the beneficials. And so you're not going to see the aphids, but you're not going to see the lady beetles either. And it takes longer for the, lady beetles to come back. And in the meantime, the spider mites, because they're not insects. Now you've got spider mites, and now the lady beetles aren't back in time. And so you've just created a big problem. And I wanted this short chapter in there because I wanted people to understand the drawbacks and limitations of pesticides, and don't go there. And then you've got to do it every 7 to 10 days.
Yes, I'm like, if it was any other big reason, there's plenty of reasons not to do it. But the constant care, not being able to go on vacation, and I love your chapter in the book about garden roses when you go on vacation and the steps to take before and after. I think that's such a helpful chapter in there. But yeah, if nothing else, save yourself that work.
Yeah. And then we had I don't know if Suzanne Wainwright Evans, I don't know if any of you heard her talk on biocontrols. She's an entomologist, and I was really, really impressed with her talk and her presentation. So I actually quote her quite a bit in my book. And she talks about the softer spray products, like insecticidal soap. And she doesn't suggest that we use them, but if you have to use a product, then they are organic products, like the softer spray products, like insecticidal soap. Neem oil, she really doesn't, that's like the worst of the softer spray products because it does have drawbacks as well. But all of the organics, even if it's organic, like spinosad is an organic. So they are, so if it's omni-rated, you should be able to use it if you're growing organically. But, do you really want to use it just because it's got, that stamp on it? It does have repercussions. For instance, the spinosad, when you read the directions on it, will tell you that it will harm the bees if the bees land on it when it's just been sprayed and it's still wet. So, rosarians or gardeners will tell you, okay, well, you can spray it in the morning when the bees aren't active, and you can spray it in the evening when they go home. Well, I don't know about you, but when I go in my garden at 6:30 in the morning, there's bees already. You'd have to wake up at 4 o'clock, and I don't know when you'd have to wake up to go spray. So really, they're not that safe, They just, even though they're organic, they're not that safe. If the complete health of my garden is jeopardized because something went wrong, then okay, maybe I'll think about using the softer spray products, but I haven't got there. I haven't needed to, and it's better not to.
Yep, I totally agree.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
What you were saying earlier about right plant choices is probably the key, right, to all natural rose growing, because if it's not a good grower in your area, if it's not disease resistant, then I love the phrase that you use in the book too, shovel prune that rose and get it out of there.
Yeah.
Replace it with one that is, and there's so much new breeding going on, so many great new roses on the market, and I think American Rose Society has a lot of information on those. There's the Earth Kind Rose series. And what sources do you use to find those roses for you, Rita? I know you mentioned Help Me Find website, which is a great one.
Yeah, so, I've included Earth Kind roses. I've included the American Garden Rose selections, and then also the ARTS as well. So these are all they really have some stringent tests that they do. And so all of those roses are wonderful. But again, not for all regions. So on the AGRS roses, they do divide it up into, I think they have 6 6 regions. And so when they have it, they'll be telling you, these roses are suggested, they got awards for these regions. So again, you're going to be looking at your regions. But another great source is your own Rose Society. So it really is, even if we have a wonderful Rose Society. The San Diego Rose Society is very active. We have a lot of members. We actually do meet in person once a month, and we have a newsletter. And we get a lot of questions on our website, and also new members who come and want to know what roses should I be buying. And then we have our open garden, so you can actually see how the roses are growing. So those are all, a lot of really good information. Also, the public garden, we have Balboa Park, we have a rose garden. So you go and you actually look to see how they're growing.
And asking at public gardens, do they use a spray program? Because some in our area, like U.S. Botanic Garden, is a no-spray garden, and some others in our region, but others do spray. So knowing that, and also asking at those open gardens that you were talking about, ask the home gardener what they're using, because maybe they are, maybe they're not, and that will be a whole different evaluation there.
It will.
Yes. And I was going to say, some of your resources that you have locally in California, you referred to Sunset earlier, which is like the Bible of gardening for Western gardeners. And for us, I would say Cornell and some of the extension services are equally as good for finding out some of those disease-resistant roses. And our local in the DC area rose societies are the Potomac Rose Society, and that is an advocate of growing roses naturally, organically, The Arlington Rose Foundation is another local society. They do have a lot of rose shows, and the Potomac Rose Society is going to reach out to you, Rita, and have you as one of our speakers this winter. I will put a note in our show links to Potomac Rose Society so they can sign up and attend the talk that you give us. And Potomac Rose Society, I have to come clean and say I'm first vice president, so that's why I'm boosting it so hard, everyone. But I do believe, as you do, joining your local Rose Society, but also supporting the American Rose Society as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, another topic is fertilizers.
Mm-hmm.
I think the information that was, when I started growing roses, I planted them and I was doing great. And then I thought I want to do even better. So I went and took a rose class. And it was really a downer. They told me I had to spray every 7 to 10 days with pesticides and fungicides. And then they also told me I had to fertilize every 2 weeks. And so I put it all on my calendar, and it was so stressful. You talk about sucking the fun out of gardening. And a lot of people believe that roses need a lot of fertilizer, and they really don't need that much. So right now, in my rose growing year, I'll prune my roses. The following month, I'll give them an organic granular fertilizer, and then I'll do that again several months later. And then sometimes maybe 3 times. So 3 times a year, 2 or 3 times a year, they'll get an organic granular fertilizer. And then I'll just keep an eye on them. If something looks like it's yellowing and needs nitrogen, then I'll do like a liquid fertilizer, like a fish emulsion. Mm-hmm. And I like to put seaweed in it. So I'll get a big trash can, fill it up with water, and then add some fish emulsion and seaweed. And so it's all organic fertilizer, and it's not a lot of it. And it's when you start using the synthetic fertilizers, you start spoiling your soil. You get a buildup of chemical salts in the soil, which is detrimental to, the beneficial microorganisms. And you can also actually burn your roses and plants when you overfeed them. Sometimes if you haven't missed your deadline, it was on my calendar, I was supposed to feed them, so let me just give them a little bit more. I'm a consulting rosarian, so I go to people's gardens and you can tell right away that they've just burnt their roses, or perhaps they fertilized them when it was just too hot, or they fertilized them and then they didn't water enough. But really, if you use the organic fertilizers, you're adding nutrients to the soil, and then the plant accesses them as it needs it. And so you're improving your soil. You're improving your soil with your organic fertilizers and amendments like compost and worm castings.
I agree, and I would say that aside from the seaweed extract and fish fertilizer, which are my 2 favorites to use on roses, I also like to do alfalfa meal.
Yes.
And that's a pretty mild one. It's like 201, I think, is the NPK on that.
Yes.
And it's a great soil amendment, so around the root zone of the plant. And you could do that regularly, or after the first flush of blooms, you deadhead those. That's a good time to give some fertilizer.
Right. So what I do with the alfalfa is when I put down my organic granulars, that's when I will put down some alfalfa as well. And, just don't put alfalfa, it does form a crust. So when you use alfalfa, you do need to scratch it in. I don't like to till my soil a lot. It's not good for the soil. And don't put alfalfa in the bottom of a hole, because it will form that crust. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
When you use alfalfa and then you water it and it just turns into a crust.
Yes, it looks like cornmeal. Yeah. Kind of like on the surface, and you could definitely tell when that's happened.
Yeah.
So scratch it in around the root zone, and then maybe put some mulch or compost on top of that.
Yeah. And I don't know what you use for mulch. I personally like to use like a soil conditioner. It's got some finely screened wood, very finely screened wood chips in it. And I prefer that. I don't like to use the large chunks of mulch. I find, I pick the leaves up, I pick petals up, I pick leaves up. That's my way of avoiding the use of fungicides. I try to keep a clean garden. So I live on the coast. I get botrytis on my blooms at certain times of the year. Even the roses that I love and have suggested that people grow, because they don't always get it, but it's the weather, it's weather conditions. So if there's botrytis, I'm going to cut it out and deadhead it, get it out of the garden. But if any blooms drop, any petals drop, I pick them up. And sometimes it's harder. It is harder with the large chunks. So I prefer the smaller chunks of.
I agree. I think the shredded hardwood, a little bit better. It doesn't float away in a big rainstorm too, like some of the big chunk wood does. And also a lot of rosarians in the mid-Atlantic will use pine straw or pine fines. So those are both great organic mulches that break down well and are beneficial for roses.
Okay. Yeah, we don't use that, but that's good to know.
Yeah, I think that would be a little pricey to import that to California, but you use what's available, and I think even shredded leaves, fine here from, the fall deciduous trees, not the shredded rose leaves like you were talking about. You want to keep good garden hygiene. And Rita, I was just picturing you going around your garden, picking up any dropped leaves or pinching out anything that you see with a dot on it of potential botrytis. But I was like, that is a great way to get some exercise, right? You don't have to join a gym if you're walking your garden.
I do have a section in the book about how many is too many. Because I think, and I've also got the section, it's called, I came up with this term, rose acquisition syndrome. My husband told me he has gas. And I was like, what? And he said, I have guitar acquisition syndrome, which he does. He does. We have guitars coming. We have so many guitars in the house. And so he does have it. And so we understand each other perfectly. I've got rose acquisition syndrome and he's got that. But I'm not the only one. I think with roses, they're so beautiful. We get the passion and then we get addicted and we want more. But then how many is too many? And so I have a small garden. So in a way, I'm fortunate. I am limited. So there's only so many I can have. And then I'm going to have to take some out to put some in. But I think that's important because we've talked about how much time roses can take if you're doing it right. They're not going to take too much time, but go out every day and taking a look at them. It doesn't take me that much time, but it does, entail going out there. If you're not going to do it right, then just have just have fewer roses and grow them well. There's a garden down the road from my house, and they start out every year. It looks not, they prune their roses, and I'm pretty sure they must fertilize them because the first blooms are very nice. And then it just goes downhill from there. I don't think they go out. I don't think they deadhead them. I don't think they do anything else to them other than that first pruning and the fertilizing. And they just look awful by about next month. You're not going to want to walk by anymore because you've got the pests, you've got the fungi, you've got everything horrible going on. So why don't they take out some of their roses and just grow a few? So I think that's also something that we need to consider is how many roses should I be growing?
Well, I'm going to say, Rita, it's kind of like us cat lovers too. You say you're going to stick to one, and then a second one comes, and then you're like, well, what's another cat? So same with the roses. Over the years, you acquire more. But yes, I would say that's a great tip to evaluate every once in a while. And the ones that aren't doing as well that we talked about that need to be shovel pruned out of there, those are the first ones. Are they giving you trouble? Are they just always not looking good and you get one bloom and that's it out of them? Those are the ones that you might want to reevaluate. Or if you feel guilty, give it to another gardener. So maybe somebody else might have more time and might have better luck with it. So in my last few questions for you, I wanted to spotlight container rose growing because that's a personal passion of mine, especially for small space and urban gardeners. Do you have any favorite roses, especially to grow in containers?
I do have a few roses that I grow in containers, but the way they usually end up in containers is because if they're not doing well in the ground, I give them a second chance. I take them out and I put them in a container because sometimes some roses just don't grow well in the soil in my garden.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them just grow great and some of them don't. So the ones that have ended up being in a container are usually the ones that I've dug out and put in a container, and then it's amazing. They'll just do so much better. But I have friends who have rose gardens with you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it. They grow all their roses in a container, but they're all kind of close up together, and they've got all I don't know how they do it. And it seems to me to be a lot more work in a way because they need more watering. But you tell me, which roses do you like to grow in containers?
So, of course, any of the miniatures and those that are bred to be ground cover roses, especially, I find those to be great. Some of the smaller of the David Austin roses do well for me in containers. And then there's a new knockout petite that I've been growing in containers, and that's doing pretty well. The petite is kind of almost bred for container use. So if you just had like a couple patio plants and didn't have much of an in-ground garden, those would be the ones I would recommend.
Yeah. So which David Austins do you like in a container?
I think now the name is of course going to escape me, Rita. And I would say Olivia gets a little too big.
Oh, too big.
Yeah, but I would say any of the ones that are not going to be climbers like James Galway.
Maybe
Boscobel, that's a perfect one. Yes, that's the name that was escaping me because I like to have a nice pretty lady name for my roses. And Boscobel is just not always coming to mind.
Yeah, I've got Boscobel in a container. I've also actually got Ambridge rose in a container, and it's doing better in the container than it was in the ground.
Yeah, one of the roses I'm growing, proven winners shrub, is Flavorette Honey Apricot. That's in a container and it's doing really nice. And so those are the rose series that are bred for culinary, but also to be beautiful roses too.
Okay. Actually, now talking about David Austin, I do have Gabriel Oak in a container and it's doing really, really well. I took Munstead Wood out of the ground because it wasn't doing well, put it in a container, and it's doing much better in a container.
Oh, I'm going to have to try that one out, Rita.
I don't know. Talking about miniatures, I do have one that it's called Maroon 8. I don't know if you know it. It's a single petal rose. It's stunning. It's burgundy with yellow, bright yellow stamens. And Jacqueline Dupre, she's white. She's also single petal. I love single petal roses. I love having bees in the garden and all the pollinators. And of course, they're a big draw.
Yeah, I was going to say the single open roses, usually they're more like straight species sometimes.
Yes.
And those would be some of our native roses, and those can be grown, some of them in containers too, people. So don't discount not having a native rose. Like our Carolina rose is a great choice.
I'm interested. Do you grow Lider rose?
I don't. Tell me about that one.
Okay, so Lider rose, the reason I ended up growing Lider rose, it's single petal, it's pink, beautiful yellow stamens of bees. Love, love, love it. And the reason I ended up with it is I was flipping through the ARS handbook and there was a rose that was a 9.0 and I was like, okay, what is this? I called a friend of mine and she said, oh, I've actually got in a vase right now in my house. And she said, it's a wonderful rose. It is. The only thing is when I ordered it on the internet, it arrived just like 2 or 3 inches tall. And it is big. It's now a big, big rose. So if you get it, I highly recommend it if you like single petal roses. But it does get big and it's totally hardy, no disease. Wonderful rose.
Good to know. So if our listeners want to contact you to find out more, how can they do so, Rita?
So I have a website. It's rose hyphen.
We'll put that link in our show notes, and I think also some people might be following you on social media as well.
Yeah, so I do have an Instagram and a Facebook. I have to say I'm still new at social media, but I'm trying to get better.
Well, we'll look out for you there too, Rita. Any final advice, especially for those of us in the Mid-Atlantic who have the heat and the humidity to contend with for some of the fungal issues that roses might get?
You know, I don't grow in your area, so I think you're more of an expert in that than I am. But really, I think it comes down to the selection. So really pay a lot of attention to your selection. I think we can just say straight on that it is a myth that roses demand spraying. So if you can select roses that don't need to be sprayed with pesticides and fungicides. And I think that the difficulty comes when we don't select those disease-resistant roses for our regions. So that's the best advice that I have for you. I can't tell you the varieties in particular that you should be doing off the top of my head. But like we talked about earlier, talk to your, consulting rosarians in your area and your local rose society.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Rita.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy. It was so nice speaking to you.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Larkspur Plant Profile. Larkspur Consolida ajacis is an annual flower with tall bloom spikes in late spring and early summer. The flowers are typically blue, purple, pink, or white. It's native to the Mediterranean region and can be grown in zones 2 to 11 as an early season annual. It grows best in full sun in well-draining soils. You can direct sow it in early spring or in late fall in zones 6 to 8 for blooming the next spring. You can also start the seeds indoors in late winter under grow lights. Larkspur seeds need cool temperatures below 55 degrees in order to germinate. It prefers cool weather and does not tolerate heat. Young larkspur plants tolerate frost well. Because larkspur can grow to 3 to 4 feet tall, you may need to stake it, especially in locations with strong winds. Larkspur is a terrific cut flower. Cut the stalks when the bottom 2 to 4 flowers have opened. The flowers will continue to open in the vase. You can also let them dry on the plant for dried flower arrangements. After flowering, you can collect the seed pods for planting next year or let them go to seed to self-sow themselves. Larkspur is deer-resistant as it contains toxic alkaloids. It is visited by various pollinators, including bumblebees and butterflies. Larkspur, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, my smooth hydrangeas have all started to bloom, as well as the astilbe. Over at the community garden plot, we had a fairly puny garlicscape harvest this year, but the blackberries are looking bountiful and are loaded with fruits that I hope ripe in the next week or two. In garden tips that we shared this week, we talked all about foraging, including that when starting to forage for wild foods, start in your own backyard or a friend's, and start with one easily identifiable weed plant, like dandelions, purslane, or lamb's quarters. In local gardening events that you might want to attend if you're in the Washington, D.C. region, FONA, the Friends of the National Arboretum, is announcing its summer evening hours once again. Starting on Monday, June 8th, the U.S. National Arboretum will stay open until 8 p.m. every weekday through Friday, August 28th. The Arboretum will close at 5 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. Find out more about that at fona.org. That's FONA.org. The United States Botanic Garden has their special summer evening hours each third Thursday in June, July, August, and September. The garden will stay open until 8 p.m. for visitors to enjoy the golden hour and sunset amidst the summer flowers and the U.S. Botanic Garden's America's State Flowers exhibit. There'll be live music and also food vendors. The gift shop will also stay open late. The dates for that are June 18th, July 16th, August 20th, and September 17th. Find out more details about that at usbg.gov. And then the Annapolis Secret Garden Tour is taking place on Saturday, June 6th from 12 to 5 and Sunday, June 7th from 12 to 5. Tickets are valid for both days. This year's tour showcases the secret gardens in the residential area of the historic district between Duke of Gloucester Street and Spa Creek. And you can find out more details about that at hammondharwoodhouse.org. Another garden tour happening that same weekend is the Wild Ones Greater Frederick, Maryland tour. That's on Saturday, June 6th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. You'll visit a variety of native plant gardens in Frederick City and learn more about sustainable landscaping. You can find out more about that at eventbrite.com, Wild Ones Native Plant Garden Tour. The event is free, but they welcome donations to support their programming. 6 gardens are participating in total. And then please take a moment to vote for the GardenDC podcast at bestof2026.washingtoncitypaper.com under the Arts and Entertainment category of Best Local Podcaster. The deadline to vote is June 10th, 2026. Thank you in advance.
This is The Last Word by Christy Page at Food Gardening Network with 10 summer squash companion plants you want in your garden by Kim Matus. Summer squash grows quickly and easily. Some, like zucchini, are known as prolific producers, and they add some beautiful color to your garden with their vivid yellow-orange flowers and bright skins. They're also prone to diseases and susceptible to pests, which is why summer squash companion plants make good additions to any garden. Companion plants complement one another in a garden in several ways. Some repel harmful insects, while others attract beneficial insects and pollinators that other plants need to thrive. Some provide shade to their neighbors, and others add nutrients to the soil. In other words, companion plants are basically the neighbor who picks up your packages and feeds your cats while you're out of town, invites you over for a summer barbecue, bakes extra bread every weekend, and drops off to you when it's still warm from the oven. That's exactly the kind of neighbor your summer squash needs in order to live a happy life in your garden. So here are 10 of them. Number 1, beans. These, of course, are one of the three sisters grouping of corn, beans, and squash. Squash acts as a barrier against weeds and helps retain moisture. Corn provides a pole for beans to climb, and beans pull nitrogen from the air and add it to the soil. 2, borage. With brilliant deep blue star-shaped flowers, borage makes a beautiful addition to any garden. The edible flowers and leaves have hints of honey and cucumber, making them a tasty addition to salads. For summer squash, it's especially helpful as it attracts beneficial insects and honeybees that are fond of the nectar. 3, catnip. As you can tell by their moniker, squash bugs are very much attracted to the summer squash in your garden, where they attack the leaves of your plants, causing them to wither, blacken, become brittle, and eventually die. Catnip may help repel squash bugs as well as aphids, and since catnip theoretically attracts cats, that may be beneficial in keeping rodents and other pests out of your garden. 4. Chives. These are excellent summer squash companion plants. They are pretty much effortless to grow. They taste delicious, and chive flowers attract bees. They also deter cucumber beetles and aphids. 5. Corn. Corn isn't just a classic summer squash companion plant. It's one of the three sisters, along with beans, that have been grown together for thousands of years. Corn and squash have a symbiotic relationship. The broadleaves of the squash plant help retain moisture in the soil and shade out weeds that can harm young corn plants. In return, corn provides an ideal environment for beans to thrive, and beans enrich the soil, providing nutrients that squash needs to grow healthy and abundant. 6. Garlic. Like chives, garlic also requires almost no effort on your part. Additionally, it helps deter snails and slugs and may act as a disinfectant. 7. Marigolds, which are another stunning addition to any garden. They grow well in all those in-between spaces, and they attract pollinators. 8. Nasturtium. These edible flowers are darlings of the companion planting world. So many harmful insects love them that they are frequently used as a trap crop to reduce pests and attract pollinators. 9. Peas. This may seem like an odd choice in a list of summer squash companion plants. The two vegetables actually grow and mature at very different times a year. Peas are cool weather crops, most often grown in early spring or late fall. Summer squash is, of course, a summer vegetable. However, like beans, peas fix nitrogen in the soil, helping prepare a rich environment for squash to thrive. 10. Radishes. Now, there are plenty of reasons to love radishes. They grow quickly, add a wonderful crunch and spice to your salads, and they help deter squash vine borers, which tunnel through the stems of squash plants, leaving the leaves, depriving them of fruit and moisture. And now a bonus, sunflowers. As summer squash companion plants go, sunflowers can be a little tricky. Why? Well, squash plants need full sun to produce. Generally speaking, the more, the better. But if the weather gets too hot for too long, your squash plants may droop with stress. Sunflowers can help shade your squash from overly intensive sunlight. Of course, sunflowers also attract pollinators like bees and butterflies, which help your squash produce. Just be aware of the sunlight factor if you opt for sunflowers as a neighbor for your squash. Well, that does it. Those are companion planting plants for summer squash. This has been Christy Page with foodgardening.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to GardenDC Podcast Episode 13, Heritage Roses with Connie Hilker. Episode 111, Flower Combinations. Episode 285, Thomas Jefferson's Flowers. You can become a listener supporter by going to the link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too. My favorite rose is Rosa Zephyrine Drouin. It's a true Barbie pink bourbon rose, famous for being completely thornless. It was developed by a French rose breeder in the 1860s and has a wonderful fragrance. It also blooms for me in part sun to part shade locations. It's fairly disease resistant, a true low-maintenance rose. Every garden should grow it. Happy gardening!